Everything in Dune is, in some sense, downstream of a breeding program that's been running for 90 generations. The Bene Gesserit carefully designed it. The Spacing Guild routes its ships because of the spice the program was pointed toward. The Emperor keeps Bene Gesserit sisters close because of the political access it gives them. House Atreides was a target bloodline selected for specific qualities long before Leto was born. House Harkonnen's genetics were threaded into the equation without the Baron's knowledge. And the whole apparatus, 90 generations of controlled selection across dozens of noble bloodlines, reaches its culmination inside one woman, placed inside House Atreides as a deliberate piece of someone else's plan. Everyone calls her Paul's mother. That's not what she is. Here's how most people understand Lady Jessica. She's Duke Leto's concubine, not his wife, because in the politics of the Imperium, Leto can't close off the option of a political marriage without weakening House Atreides. He loves her. She loves him. They have a son, Paul. She's a trained Bene Gesserit, which means she's one of the most capable human beings alive, though the first book tends to put Paul in the foreground and keep her in support. She teaches him. She advises Leto. When everything collapses on Arrakis, she survives, adapts, and keeps Paul alive long enough for him to become what he becomes. She makes one significant choice before the story begins. She chose to give Leto a son when her sisterhood told her to give him only daughters. And that choice echoes through everything that follows. That's the surface reading. It's not wrong exactly, it just doesn't go very far. Let me start with the Bene Gesserit, because you genuinely can't understand what Jessica is without understanding what they are. The Bene Gesserit are an ancient sisterhood. Think a genetic science organization crossed with a religious order crossed with the most patient intelligence agency in history. They've been operating across thousands of years of deliberate planning. They practice what they call prana bindu training, complete conscious control of the body, down to individual muscle groups and nerve responses. A Bene Gesserit can regulate her own heart rate, her hormone production, her pain response. She can metabolize certain poisons. She can read micro-expressions faster than the people producing them are consciously aware of. She can use the voice, a technique of modulating breath, tone, and rhythm in speech that triggers near-involuntary compliance in almost anyone who hears it. And she has access to other memory. Other memory is worth a moment because it's the thing that makes the Bene Gesserit what they are at the deepest level. When a Bene Gesserit undergoes the ritual that makes her a Reverend Mother, she receives the accumulated genetic memories of every Bene Gesserit woman who came before her. Not summaries, not impressions, but the actual experiential memories of predecessors stretching back through generations. Hundreds of lives, thousands, all accessible to her. The Bene Gesserit describe it as being a river of women. You are yourself, but you also contain everyone who made you. Receiving it improperly, without sufficient preparation, can shatter a person entirely. Here's the limitation. Other memory runs through the female ancestral line. The male side is a dark place, sensed but unreachable, a territory the Bene Gesserit can feel the edge of but can't enter. And for 90 generations, everything the Bene Gesserit have been doing has been pointed at closing that gap. They want to produce a Kwisatz Haderach. Herbert took the name from the Hebrew concept Kefetzat Haderach, shortening of the way, a mystical idea about miraculous presence in multiple places at once. The Kwisatz Haderach would be a male Bene Gesserit, a man with the full scope of the sisterhood's capabilities, plus access to the masculine ancestral memory the women can't reach. He'd be capable of genuine prescience, foresight into possible futures at a level no navigator, no matter how much spice he consumes, has ever managed. The plan was to produce him at a time and place of their choosing, under conditions they controlled, and then direct him. That last part is what everything else hinges on. Now, what the Bene Gesserit needed for this was a very specific combination of bloodlines. House Atreides carried something the program needed, a genuine capacity for moral clarity, the ability to inspire loyalty without compulsion, a kind of baseline human decency that held across generations. A Kwisatz Haderach with those qualities would be followable, not just powerful, but able to lead in ways people chose to accept. The program also needed the Harkonnen bloodline in the mix, something harder, more calculating, a different kind of force. The Bene Gesserit arranged for Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam to bear a daughter to Baron Vladimir Harkonnen as a deliberate genetic contribution to the program. The Baron participated without understanding the purpose. That daughter is Jessica. This is the piece most readers gloss past. Jessica isn't just a Bene Gesserit agent assigned to House Atreides. She is herself a product of the breeding program. Her mother is Mohiam, the Emperor's personal truth-sayer, the woman who appears in the first pages of Dune to administer the Gom Jabber test to Paul. The Gom Jabber is a test of humanness, a poison needle held to the neck while your hand sits inside a box of induced neural agony, with instructions not to remove it on pain of death. Mohiam watches Paul go through this. She knows exactly whose grandson she's holding that needle to. She's testing her own daughter's son. The Baron, conducting his own campaign against House Atreides at that very moment, has no idea. He hates House Atreides with a focused, practiced malice. His own blood is inside the Atreides heir. He spends the entire novel trying to destroy the family carrying it. The Sisterhood seeded Harkonnen blood into the Atreides line and installed it in the form of a concubine. That's the move. Jessica was given specific instructions for her role. Bear only daughters for Leto. The breeding plan had one more generation to run. A specific daughter eventually paired with the right partner to complete the program and produce the Kwisatz Haderach on schedule. Jessica was the penultimate step. One daughter, then done. She bore a son. Herbert presents the reason as genuine. She loved Leto. He wanted a male heir, someone to carry the Atreides name, inherit the house, hold it against the enemies already circling. She chose to give him that. It's an act of love, and it's a real one. The Bene Gesserit read it as a betrayal, and in terms of the plan, they're not wrong. But look at what the betrayal produced. Paul Atreides carries the Atreides bloodline, the Harkonnen bloodline, the exact genetic combination the program was built to eventually generate, plus the full Bene Gesserit education Jessica will give him. He's one generation ahead of schedule. He arrives outside the Sisterhood's managed conditions. They have no apparatus in place to guide him, and because they don't, they cannot control what he becomes. That's the deal. What Jessica passes to Paul is worth understanding in detail, because it's the most direct expression of what she actually is. She teaches him prana bindu, conscious control of every muscle and nerve in the body. She teaches him the voice and how to recognize it when it's being used against him. She teaches him to read people, micro-expressions, breath shifts, the tiny physical tells most people broadcast without knowing they're doing it. She teaches him the weirding way, Bene Gesserit combat technique developed over centuries, which looks like something else entirely to anyone trained in conventional fighting. She teaches him how to suppress pain, manage fear without suppressing it, hold his emotional state under pressure while remaining fully aware of what he's feeling. And beyond the training, she passes on the genetic potential for what spice will eventually unlock in him. In a Kwisatz Haderach, other memory isn't limited to the female ancestral line. When Paul's prescience opens on Arrakis, he doesn't just access what Jessica carries. He steps into the masculine ancestral memory that no Bene Gesserit has ever entered. He becomes able to look across possible futures with a clarity no navigator can match, not because he used more spice, but because the Bene Gesserit spent 90 generations building the instrument that could. Jessica gave him the architecture. Arrakis did the rest. There's one more piece of what Jessica deploys on Arrakis that's easy to underestimate. The Bene Gesserit practice something called the Missionaria Protectiva, the deliberate seeding of religious myths into cultures across the Imperium over generations, creating ready-made legendary frameworks that a Bene Gesserit can step into if she finds herself stranded among a given population. Specific structures, a messianic mother arriving in crisis, signs and portents calibrated to read as the right kind of arrival, quietly installed into cultures that will never know it was done. It's insurance. Planted by women who'll be dead before it's used, for women they'll never meet. The Fremen of Arrakis are among the most thoroughly cultivated populations in the Imperium for this. Arrakis produces the spice. The Bene Gesserit were never going to leave that population unworked. When Jessica and Paul end up in the deep desert with Harkonnen forces behind them, Jessica uses the Missionaria Protectiva. She steps into the prophetic framework the Sisterhood planted generations ago, letting existing myth do the work of establishing her and Paul as protected figures, possibly as the figures the prophecy describes. She knows exactly what she's doing. Paul learns how it works gradually, partly after he's already started to believe parts of it himself. By the time he fully understands the mechanism has already shaped how he understands his own destiny. That's Jessica operating at full capacity in the worst conditions the Sisterhood could have left her in. Then there's the Water of Life ceremony. The Fremen Reverend Mother is dying. Jessica undergoes the ritual that will make her a Reverend Mother. She drinks the Water of Life, the chemically altered biological output of a drowned sandworm. a substance acutely lethal to almost anyone who attempts it. A Bene Gesserit with sufficient training can metabolize it. Jessica does. What she receives in exchange is full other memory, the complete accumulated consciousness of every female Bene Gesserit predecessor, flooding into her in a single overwhelming rush. She comes through it as a reverend mother. She's pregnant with Alia during the ceremony. The water of life and the ancestral memory pass through Jessica to her unborn daughter. Alia is born having already received other memory. Thousands of inherited consciousnesses present in her mind before she takes her first breath. She will never have a mind that wasn't already occupied. She will never be innocent. The Bene Gesserit call this preborn. The Fremen call it abomination. And Alia spends most of Dune Messiah and Children of Dune fighting an increasingly losing battle against the personality of Baron Harkonnen, living inside her inherited memory as one of its strongest voices, until she loses that fight entirely, and the Baron wins. That outcome also traces back to Jessica, a decision made under pressure on Arrakis, and the consequence arrives decades later in her daughter. Here's what most people miss when they look at all of this together. Jessica's defiance, her act of love, is the single thing most responsible for what the Bene Gesserit were actually afraid of. Not the Kwisatz Haderach. They wanted the Kwisatz Haderach. What they were afraid of was one they couldn't control. The plan required a managed birth in a managed environment at a controlled time, with the sisterhood positioned to guide what came out of it. Instead, Paul arrives one generation early on Arrakis in the middle of a catastrophe, with no Bene Gesserit infrastructure in place to reach him, raised by a mother who has already demonstrated she makes her own calls when she thinks they're right. When Paul becomes fully realized, when the prescience opens and the Fremen follow him and the jihad begins, the Bene Gesserit are watching something they built, from a distance they never intended to be at, with no way to reach it. The scale of the jihad is enormous. Billions of people, a wave of religious violence that crosses the known universe and reshapes the Imperium entirely. Paul can see it coming. He chooses it because the futures he can see without it are worse. And the Bene Gesserit, who bred toward this moment for 90 generations, have almost nothing to say about any of it. They got everything they bred toward. They got none of what they planned for. Herbert said directly in interviews that Dune is partly a warning about charismatic leaders, about the human tendency to surrender judgment to a messiah figure under pressure, and the disaster that follows. The jihad is not a triumph in Herbert's framework. It's a catastrophe. But what Jessica's arc adds to that warning is something quieter and more specific. The Bene Gesserit believed that if you controlled the genetics, the training, the placement, and the timing, you could produce a human instrument and then direct it. What they produced was a person, shaped by grief, by a desert no program could anticipate, by a mother who made one call the sisterhood didn't sanction, by a life that couldn't be scripted because lives don't stay planned. Jessica is the hinge. She's where the 90 Generation Project stopped being a program and became a child who grew into something the program had no way to contain. So that's Lady Jessica, the manufactured daughter of her son's greatest enemy, a Bene Gesserit instrument who defied her orders and produced precisely the genetic combination the sisterhood needed one generation ahead of schedule. The woman who leveraged her own sisterhood's planted myths to survive Arrakis, who drank something lethal to become a reverend mother, and in doing so put Baron Harkonnen's consciousness inside her unborn daughter's mind, and who trained Paul Atreides so completely that when Arrakis finished what she started, there was nothing left for the Bene Gesserit to do about what he became. The Bene Gesserit spent 90 generations building toward her. They just didn't account for her loving him. If you want to go deeper on the Bene Gesserit as a system, what the Sisterhood actually is as an institution, how it operates across the Imperium, and what Herbert was really building with it, that video is up next. Subscribe if you haven't already. New videos go up regularly. I'll see you in the next one.